Hello and welcome to Classified Culture, the best place to find science fiction and horror stories that you've probably never heard before. Please like and share this video so more people have the chance to experience something fresh and frightening. Feel free to leave a message in the comment section and subscribe if you're not already a member. Any feedback and support is always appreciated. I suppose I should get on with it sooner than later. So with that being said, it's time to let the words I speak lead your imagination on another dark and twisted tale. Julian Moreno groaned, his vision swimming into focus amidst the cold fluorescence of the underground archive. His head throbbed where it had struck something hard, a dull ache radiating down his spine. He lay sprawled on the dusty concrete floor, surrounded by towering shelves of ancient books and artifacts, their shadows stretching like elongated claws under the flickering lights. The air was thick with the scent of age and disuse, the silence so profound it seemed to press against his eardrums. He pushed himself up, his hands coming away grimy from the floor. His watch was cracked, the hands frozen at an hour-long past. He remembered checking in at the surface entrance, then nothing. No explosion. No sudden collapse, just a blank void where his memory should have been. Panic surged, but he tamped it down, taking a deep breath to steady himself. His duty was clear: secure the archive, notify the surface team, and retrieve any damaged artifacts. But something was wrong. The archive's central corridor, usually bathed in a soft glow from overhead lights, was shrouded in darkness. Only intermittent flickers of light illuminated the path ahead, casting stark shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. He switched on his flashlight, its beam slicing through the gloom like a blade. The silence felt unnatural. No hum of machinery, no distant echo of water pipes. Just an oppressive hush that seemed to muffle even his own heartbeat. As he stepped deeper into the archive, his boots crunching on broken glass he hadn't noticed before, he felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He turned sharply, flashlight beam sweeping across the empty shelves behind him. Nothing moved, yet the feeling persisted like an itch he couldn't scratch. He shrugged it off, attributing it to his injury and the disorienting effect of waking up alone underground. But then he saw it. A smear of red on the edge of a shelf, high above where no one should have cause to touch. Blood, dark and dried, stark against the dusty stone. His heart quickened as he traced its path with his flashlight beam, following it around the corner, into a narrower aisle. There, half hidden behind a toppled crate, was the source, a ragged cut in the stone floor, deep enough to have drawn blood if someone had fallen. He knelt down, running his fingers along the edge of the cut. It was fresh, not the result of some ancient quake or erosion. And there were other marks too, shallow indentations in the stone that seemed almost deliberate, like words carved by a feverish hand. He leaned closer, squinting to make out the letters. Suddenly, his flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into absolute darkness. He fumbled for his backup torch, but it was missing from his belt. Panic surged again, stronger this time, threatening to overwhelm him. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think. He was lost underground, alone, injured, with no light and no communication. And there were signs of violence, signs that something, or someone, had been here before him. As he reached out cautiously into the darkness, his fingers brushing against something cold and metal, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone after all, that perhaps whatever had made those marks was still here, watching, waiting. And that thought sent a shiver down his spine, one that had nothing to do with the chill of the underground archive. Julian's breath caught in his throat as his fingers closed around the familiar shape of his backup torch. Relief washed over him until he realized that it was warm to the touch, its lead displaying a faint, flickering glow before dying completely. He tossed it aside, his heart pounding wildly now. 2 flashlights dead within seconds of each other. This wasn't just equipment failure. Something was wrong. He reached for his radio, desperate for contact with the surface team, but static crackled back at him, punctuated by a brief, garbled burst of noise that seemed almost like whispers. He shook it, banged it against his palm, but it made no difference. The radio was useless. Panic threatened to consume him, but he fought it down. He had to keep moving, find the archive's emergency generator, and restore power. It was their only chance of getting out alive. He groped his way forward, hands trailing along the shelves until he found the junction box that controlled the lights in this section. As he yanked open the door, he froze at what he saw. Every fuse was blown, wires hanging like severed nerves from the burnt-out sockets. And there, scrawled across the inside of the door in blood-red letters, were more words: "Leave while you can." His blood ran cold. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a warning. Someone, or something, didn't want them here. But who could have done this? His team was supposed to be the first ones down here since the archive was sealed off decades ago. A sudden noise echoed through the darkness, like stone grinding against stone. It came from deeper within the archive, where no one should have been moving anything. Julian hesitated, then started towards the sound, his heart hammering in his chest. He had to know what was making that noise, had to find out who or what was behind these attacks. As he moved deeper into the archive, the air grew colder still, and the darkness seemed to press in on him like a physical force. The silence was oppressive, broken only by his own ragged breathing and the distant echoing grind of stone on stone. Suddenly, Julian's foot caught on something hidden in the shadows. He stumbled forward, throwing out his hands to catch himself. His palms scraped against rough stone, but it was the sudden, searing pain in his ankle that made him gasp. Julian Moreno lay on the cold floor, clutching his twisted ankle, the pain of white-hot spikes shooting up his leg. He had stumbled into something hidden in the darkness, some unseen obstacle that had sent him sprawling. His breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to comprehend what had happened. The grinding noise had stopped, leaving only the heavy silence of the archive pressing down on him. He looked around, trying to spot whatever it was he tripped over. His eyes widened as he saw it, a massive stone sarcophagus, half buried in the debris and dust. It was old, ancient even, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to writhe under the flickering lights. A feeling of unease washed over him. This wasn't right. No one had mentioned any such artifact being stored down here. He forced himself up, limping heavily as he leaned against a nearby shelf for support. The air grew colder still, and the darkness seemed to deepen around him, as if the archive itself was trying to hide something. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he had to do next. He had to examine that sarcophagus, understand why it was here, and who or what was inside. As he limped closer, the grinding noise started again, louder this time, vibrating through the stone under his feet. The sarcophagus shifted, a section of its lid sliding off with a heavy, echoing thud. Julian froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't see anything inside, just more darkness. But he could feel it, a presence, cold and malevolent. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, this time plunging the archive into total darkness. Panic surged within him, but he fought it down, his mind racing. He had to find a light source, something to ward off the encroaching terror. His hands fumbled in his pockets, searching for his flashlight. It was gone. He must have lost it when he fell. He groped around blindly, his fingers brushing against cold stone and rusted metal until they closed around something small and plastic. A pack of matches. He struck one, the tiny flame casting eerie shadows on the walls as he moved towards the sarcophagus. As he approached, the match went out, plunging him back into darkness. But it was enough to see that something had emerged from within the sarcophagus. It stood tall and humanoid, but twisted, its limbs elongated and bent at angles that defied nature. Its face was a mass of shadows, featureless, except for two glowing embers where its eyes should have been. Julian felt a cold dread wash over him. This thing, it was the source of the attacks, the noise, the fear. He turned to run, but his injured ankle betrayed him. He stumbled, catching himself on a shelf. Books and artifacts crashed down around him, blocking his path. Trapped. He could only watch as the creature, Davidson, he heard a voice whisper in his mind. Julian Davidson moved closer, its glowing eyes never leaving him. "You're not real," Julian gasped out, desperation clinging to earth. "You're just a figment of my imagination." Davidson paused, then threw back its head and laughed. The sound echoed through the archive, a chill running down Julian's spine at the sheer wrongness of it. "You're right, Julian," it said, its voice like nails on stone. "I am you. Your fear made me real." Julian felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He had to get away, had to find a way out. But the path behind him was blocked by fallen debris, and Davidson stood between him and the only other exit he knew of. His mind raced, searching for a solution, a way out. Davidson seemed to sense his desperation. It stepped closer, its form shifting, growing more solid with each passing second. "You can't escape me, Julian," it whispered. "I'm your fear made manifest. I'm your anxiety, your paranoia. You can't run from yourself." As Davidson spoke, the lights flickered back on, casting its twisted form in stark relief. Julian saw his chance. He lunged forward, shoving past Davidson, ignoring the fresh wave of pain from his ankle. He had to reach that exit, had to get out of here. But as he moved, the grinding noise started again. The stone shelves around him began to shift, their ancient foundations cracking under some unseen force. Books and artifacts tumbled down, blocking his path. Davidson laughed behind him, a sound filled with malice and triumph. Julian turned back, his heart sinking as he saw what Davidson had done. The exit was gone, sealed off by fallen debris. He was trapped. Trapped with Davidson, with his fear made real. His breath came in ragged gasps as panic threatened to overwhelm him. But he fought it down, a new resolve hardening within him. He wouldn't run. He couldn't outpace his own fears. Instead, he would face them. He would understand them, accept them, and maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to control them. But first, he had to survive this encounter. With a deep breath, Julian turned to face Davidson, steeling himself for what was to come. He wouldn't run anymore. He would stand his ground and fight back against the darkness that threatened to consume him. Julian stood his ground, facing Davidson in the dim light of the archive's central control room. His ankle throbbed where he twisted it earlier, a stark reminder of the lengths he'd gone to avoid this confrontation. But now, there was no escape. Davidson had seen to that. The entity loomed before him, its form shifting like liquid shadow. Julian could see his own fears reflected in its depths. The claustrophobia born from being trapped underground for too long. The anxiety that gnawed at him even before he'd entered this godforsaken place. He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the familiar tendrils of panic trying to worm their way into his mind. "I know what you are," Julian said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "You're my fear made real, my anxiety given form by this place." His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he refused to let fear control him. "Not anymore." Davidson laughed, a sound that grated against Julian's ears like nails on slate. "You think you understand me, little archivist? You know nothing. I am the darkness that consumes all light. I am the silence that swallows screams." Julian shook his head. "No, you're not. You're just a manifestation of my fears. And I refuse to feed you anymore." He took a step forward, ignoring the pain in his ankle. "You overreact to deliberate action, don't you? That's why you sealed off the exit, because I tried to run." Davidson snarled, its form twisting into something more feral. Julian felt a surge of fear but pushed it down, focusing on what he knew to be true. This was his anxiety, his fear. He could control it. "You can't control me," Davidson hissed, its voice echoing through the room. "I am inevitable. I am your end." Julian reached out, his hand passing through the darkness that made up Davidson's form. It felt like plunging into ice-cold water, but he didn't pull back. Instead, he took another step forward, and another. Each step was a struggle against the fear that threatened to consume him. But he refused to give in. Davidson screamed, its voice a cacophony of broken glass and twisted metal. The darkness around them seemed to intensify, pressing down on Julian with crushing force. But he stood firm, refusing to acknowledge the fear that clawed at his mind. "You can't control me," Julian repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, "because I am not afraid." And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, Davidson dissipated into the darkness. The pressure lifted, leaving behind only the heavy silence of the archive. Julian stood alone in the control room, his breath ragged, his body trembling with exertion and adrenaline. But he had done it. He had faced his fears and accepted them, and in doing so, he had banished Davidson from this place. But at what cost? Julian limped over to the central console, flicking switches and pressing buttons despite knowing it was futile. The power was still out, the emergency generators offline. He tried the radio again, static crackling in his ear before giving way to silence once more. There was no going back now. Davidson had been his chance at rescue, his hope of escape, and he'd banished it. Now, he was truly trapped here, alone with his thoughts and the darkness that stretched out around him like an endless void. But even as despair threatened to consume him, Julian held on to one truth. He had faced his fears and survived. He could do it again. He had to, because there was no other way out of this place alive. Julian leaned against the console, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His ankle throbbed in time with his heartbeat, a grim reminder of the chase that had led him here. He looked down at his hands, still trembling from the confrontation. They were stained with dirt and dust, but there was something else too, a dark residue, like ink spilled on his skin. He wiped his hands on his pants, but the stain refused to budge. It seemed to absorb his efforts, growing darker still, until it looked like he'd dipped his fingers in oil. Julian felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what this meant. Davidson had marked him. The entity had left its touch upon him, a physical reminder of their encounter. Julian limped over to the sink in the corner of the room, turning on the tap with shaking hands. He scrubbed at his fingers, but the water ran black before disappearing down the drain. It was no use. Davidson's mark wouldn't be washed away so easily. As he dried his hands, Julian caught sight of his reflection in the mirror above the sink. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his face was pale except for 2 high spots of color on his cheeks. But it was his eyes that held him captive. They were wild, haunted, filled with a fear he hadn't felt since he was a child. He turned away from his reflection, unable to look at himself any longer. That's when he noticed the change in the room. The darkness seemed heavier now, more oppressive. It pressed against the windows like a physical force, threatening to seep inside if given half the chance. Julian approached the nearest window, pressing his face close to the glass. He could see movement out there, shadows writhing and twisting, as if they were alive. And perhaps they were, he thought with a shiver. Perhaps Davidson had never truly left him. Perhaps it was still here, waiting for him to weaken, to let down his guard. A sudden noise echoed through the archive. A low moaning sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Julian's heart leapt into his throat as he recognized it. It was the same sound he'd heard when Davidson had first appeared, the sound of something ancient and terrible waking up. He turned back towards the control room, intent on finding some way out of this place despite the futility of it all. But even as Julian's breath fogged the glass as he leaned in closer, trying to make out more details of the writhing shadows outside. The moaning grew louder, vibrated through the floor beneath his feet like some ancient, malevolent engine coming to life. He stumbled back from the window, heart pounding in his chest. He knew what he had to do. Davidson fed on fear. That much was clear now. But it also overreacted when faced with deliberate action, a weakness he could exploit. With grim determination, Julian turned towards the archive central control room, limping heavily but resolute. The door creaked open at his touch, revealing the dimly lit interior. Banks of ancient computers hummed softly, their green displays casting eerie shadows on the walls. A lone chair sat before a console covered in dust and cobwebs. Julian approached it cautiously, his injured ankle threatening to give way with each step. He took a seat, hands hovering over the keyboard. The monitor flickered to life as he hit the power button, displaying a login prompt. He typed in the credentials he'd memorized years ago, praying they still worked after all this time. The screen flashed green, granting him access. Julian navigated through the archaic interface, searching for anything that could help him. His eyes scanned lines of code, system logs, until finally he found it. A maintenance control panel. Among the options was one marked external lights. He clicked it, revealing a schematic of the archive's exterior lighting system. With a deep breath, Julian made his choice. He selected every light outside the archive, every camera, every sensor, and set them to full power. Then he clicked overload. The archive shuddered around him as energy coursed through its veins. Outside, the writhing shadows screamed, their forms distorting under the sudden glare of floodlights. Davidson's presence was visible now, a roiling darkness that thrashed against the onslaught. Julian gripped the console tightly, knuckles white, as he watched the struggle unfold on the security cameras. The lights flickered, struggled to maintain their intensity against something unseen but undeniably malevolent. Then, with a final burst of brightness, they flared one last time before exploding in showers of sparks. Darkness reclaimed the archive, but it was different now. Davidson's form had dissipated, leaving behind nothing but empty shadows. Julian sagged back in his chair, relief washing over him. He'd done it. He'd confronted his fears, accepted them, and turned them against Davidson. But victory came at a cost. The explosion had severed the archive's power supply, plunging everything into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on briefly, before giving up entirely, their batteries spent after decades of inactivity. Julian was trapped now, truly alone amidst the ruins of his triumph. His ankle throbbed painfully as he stood, reminding him of the twisted ligaments within. There would be no escaping this place now, not with his injuries. But perhaps that was okay. Perhaps he could find peace here, surrounded by echoes of his past fears. Julian hobbled out of the control room, leaning heavily on the shelves for support. He moved deeper into the archive, leaving behind the shattered remains of Davidson's power. His heart ached with the finality of it all. But there was acceptance too. This was his fate now, his prison, and he would face it head-on, just as he had faced Davidson. As he settled himself amidst the dusty tomes and artifacts, Julian felt a strange calm wash over him. The archive was quiet again, its shadows no longer alive with malice. He took a deep breath, steadying himself against the inevitable pain of his injuries. Then, with a small smile, he closed his eyes and waited for whatever came next. Julian's eyes snapped open at the sudden cold. The temperature had plummeted, a chill seeping into his bones despite his exertions. He hugged himself, rubbing his arms briskly as goosebumps prickled his skin. The archive, once filled with the hum of machinery and the occasional echo of his own breath, now seemed utterly still, as if holding its breath. A soft clicking echoed through the darkness, growing louder, more insistent. Julian froze, heart pounding in his chest again. It sounded like footsteps, but they were wrong. Too heavy, too rhythmic. He strained his eyes, trying to pierce the gloom, but it was no use. He was blind down here. The clicking stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Julian's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the sound. Davidson, or what remained of him, was still alive. The lights hadn't destroyed it. They'd only pissed it off. Panic surged through him, threatening to overwhelm his rationality. But he pushed it down, focusing on his surroundings instead. He couldn't outrun Davidson, In his current state, and fighting was out of the question. He needed another plan, something that didn't involve confrontation, but could still neutralize the threat. His eyes fell on a nearby shelf, half collapsed and leaning precariously against the wall. An idea began to form, risky, but potentially effective. If he couldn't fight Davidson directly, maybe he could trap it instead. With renewed determination, Julian limped towards the shelf. His ankles screamed in protest, but he ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. He reached out, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the shelf, and selected several heavy tomes from its topmost level. They were old, musty, their pages yellowed with age. He carried them back to where he'd heard the growling stop, placing them carefully on the floor in a makeshift barrier. It wouldn't hold Davidson forever, but it might give him enough time to seal it away properly. Julian turned back towards the central control room, limping faster now, driven by a fresh surge of adrenaline. He needed to reroute power from another section of the archive, trick the system into believing there was still an active threat. That should buy him some time. As he reached the door, he glanced. Julian's fingers danced over the control panel, rerouting power with a speed born of desperation and adrenaline. The archive hummed around him as systems came online, lights flickering back to life in sections long dormant. He could hear Davidson's howls echoing down the corridors, furious at being denied its prey. But Julian knew it wouldn't last. He couldn't keep this up indefinitely. As expected, the power reroute drew Davidson's attention. It appeared at the doorway, eyes burning like twin furnaces, body writhing with shadows. Julian stood his ground, hands trembling but steady on the control panel. This was it. No more running, no more hiding. He'd face his fears head on. "You're me," Julian said, voice echoing in the sudden silence. "My anxiety, my fear. You're not real, not truly. You're just a reflection of what's inside me." Davidson screeched, lunging forward. Julian didn't flinch. Instead, he reached out, placing his hand on Davidson's chest. It felt solid, real, but Julian knew better. He pushed, pouring all his will into that single point of contact. Davidson screamed, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the archive. Shadows writhed, then began to dissipate, unraveling like threads under Julian's touch. Davidson's form wavered, losing cohesion before dissolving completely, swallowed by the darkness. Silence descended once more, heavy and absolute. Julian's breath came in ragged gasps as he leaned against the control panel, relief coursing through him. He'd done it. He'd faced his fears and conquered them. But as his breathing slowed, he became aware of a new sensation: pain. His ankle throbbed, a deep ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. He looked down to find it swollen, twice its usual size, skin stretched taut and discolored. He limped towards the door, testing his weight on it. Agony lanced up his leg, but he gritted his teeth, determined to leave this place. But the door didn't budge. He tried again, throwing his shoulder against it with all his might. Still nothing. Panic began to rise, but he pushed it down. There had to be another way. He hobbled back to the control panel, scanning the displays for an alternative exit. Most were marked as sealed or inaccessible due to damage caused by Davidson's rampage. One caught his eye: emergency exit, the lower levels. It was risky, but it was his best option. He initiated the override sequence, the archive groaning around him as it diverted power to open the sealed door. With a final glance at the darkness where Davidson had been, Julian limped towards the newly opened exit. As he stepped through, the lights flickered, then died, plunging the archive into blackness. Behind him, the emergency door slid shut, sealing him off from the main section. He was trapped, but he was safe. And for now, that was enough. He leaned against the cold metal wall, sliding down to the floor. His ankle hurt like hell, but it was a physical pain, one he understood. It wouldn't consume him, not like Davidson had threatened to do. He looked up at the dim emergency lights, their glow barely penetrating the gloom. This would be his life now, isolated, alone, trapped underground. but it was better than being haunted by his own fears. Around him, the archive hummed with latent power, a silent testament to his victory. Davidson was gone, his anxiety acknowledged and accepted. Julian smiled, a small, sad curve of the lips. He'd found peace here, amidst the darkness and dust. And though it would be a solitary existence, he could live with that. After all, he'd faced his fears and emerged victorious. What more could anyone ask for? Endo.